So I was browsing Facebook Marketplace and came across this not very descriptive ad for a bike. And normally I wouldn't click on something like this, but something about it intrigued me, so I had a look. And it turned out it was not your typical piece of junk, but actually a Cannondale. And even more than that, I noticed that this bike for $75 had some pretty good parts on it, starting with the rear derailleur, which is the Shimano 105. And that's often an overall indicator of the quality of the bike is the parts that it has on it. So I decided to check it out and I bought it. So let's see what I got. So here it is. Now it's obviously missing the pedals and it's pretty dirty, but otherwise it looks pretty good, except for the top tube here, which is chipped. Not too bad, doesn't look like it's anything other than maybe being knocked against a pole or something like that. No sign of breakage. All the parts are here intact, so I saw when I was pushing it back to the car the brakes were jammed on, and they definitely need some attention. These brake blocks are hard as a rock, and there's some rust on some of the parts. It doesn't look like it was left out in the rain every day, maybe just occasionally, so we can deal with that. So I like to do a little research and figure out exactly what this bike is. So on Cannondale's website, they have archived catalogs from a number of years, and I was able to figure out through the process of elimination that this bicycle is from 2009. So here I can download the 2009 catalog. So here's the 2009 catalog, and we're going to scroll down to the section for the recreational / urban / city bikes and see what we have. Okay, here we are. So this is the Quick series, and here's our bike, the Quick 2. So this one is in the charcoal gray, and also it's available in blue. So again, this bike has some pretty good parts on it, starting with that Shimano rear derailleur, name brand Continental tires, Cell San Marco saddle, etc. But this is strange. It says the frame is a quick alloy carbon. Now, I knew it was alloy, aluminum, from the scratches on the top tube, but carbon, that was a surprise to me. So we need to check this out. So another resource you can look at is this website Bikepedia, which has a lot of archived information about models. So if I go to the Cannondale page, go to 2009, and then to our bike, the Quick 2, find that it sold originally in 2009 for almost $1,100. So this was not a cheap bike by any stretch of the imagination, so quite a deal for $75. So coming back to the bike, the seat stays here that look like they're made of fake carbon fiber with this pattern on it, turns out are actually made of real carbon fiber. So the main triangle of the frame is aluminum, and it seems to be joined as a plug right here into the seat lug. And if we go down to the bottom, it looks like they are sort of bolted onto the dropouts here. So this is an mainly an aluminum frame bike with carbon fiber seat stays, which is very impressive for, again, something that's intended for a fairly casual rider. So again, we've got some pretty impressive parts on this recreational bicycle, from the rear derailleur and the 9-speed cassette to a name brand FSA crankset and saddle. It's got a carbon front fork, and one of the best parts is the wheels. First of all, they have Continental tires on them, but they're actually Shimano wheels, not just Shimano rims, but they also have Shimano hubs. So frequently bike companies will cheap out and use an inexpensive hub like a Formula brand one, laced sometimes with a better wheel, but this is an entire Shimano wheel. So I've given the Quick a quick cleanup with soap and water and not found any cause for concern other than the brakes, which I certainly knew about. So one thing we want to evaluate is the bearings. So Bicycle has bearings in multiple places. So the top and bottom races of the headset, and of course the crankset and the wheels. So I want to determine if these need to be cleaned and rebuilt. So the headset turns freely. There's no sign of notching. For the crankset, it also turns smoothly, and I don't really see any cause for that to be fixed either. So because the bearings are in good shape, I've decided I'm not going to disassemble the bike any more than is necessary. But I am going to remove the chain for cleaning to soak, and the rear derailleur, particularly the jockey wheels, were really cruddy. So I'm going to take that off the bike. I'm going to leave the front derailleur on though, because these are notoriously difficult to align, because with the clamp you can adjust it both vertically and in terms of turning it. And if it isn't broke, I'm not going to fix it. But I'm going to remove the chain, and for that I need a special tool. So this chain is made by KMC, and it has a master link on it here. You can see it right here. So I'm going to use a special tool made by Park to compress this link, to pop it open. Like that. And then the two plates will come off, and I can remove the chain. Actually, before I remove the chain, I'm going to do one more thing. So, although this bike doesn't seem to have that much wear on it, it has some wear on it, and you want to put the chain back on the same way it came off. So I'm going to scratch with an awl a little arrow into the plate of the chain, so and then pointing forward, so I know which way to put the chain back on. So with the chain off, I can remove the rear derailleur just with this bolt right here. You can remove the rear derailleur without removing the chain by removing both of the jockey wheels, which is a bit fiddly, but that's not really going to be necessary now. I'm going to try to save the cable. It seems like it's in pretty good condition, so no need to replace it unless it's necessary. I am also going to remove the crankset, not because I need to repack the bearings, these outboard bearings, they're in good shape, but it's just going to be a lot easier to clean, and this type of crankset's very easy to remove. So on the non-drive side, you have a bolt here. So the non-drive side came off very easily, so this should now pull right out. Just wiggle it a little bit. So I'll give all this a cleanup. I can now get to the chain rings. I may take this apart to clean them more easily, and I'll just clean up the outside of this. Don't really need to open up the bearings. I'm also going to remove the brakes, so it's just these bolts right here. Sometimes the front and rear brakes are identical, and sometimes they're not. Depends on the bicycle. So if possible, you don't want to get the parts mixed up between the front and the back. So as I pull this apart, there's a spring here. I need to make sure I get that back in the right position. So I'm going to pull this out here. So then there's another washer that goes inside there, and then the spring. So as I take apart the rear derailleur, it's also important to note that they look the same, but these two jockey wheels are actually not the same as I take them apart. So you want to keep them straight. So this is the lower jockey wheel, and this is the upper one, and they have the same number of teeth, but the upper one, you can see, is labeled Shimano Centeron pulley, and this one is not. So both has sort of a flat washer on each side, and there's a little bush inside, so you want to push that bushing out so you can get that nice and clean too. So there's a lot of degreasing products available to put in my parts tank here, but this was my favorite one, but unfortunately it's been discontinued. This was sold by Performance. So you dilute this at between a 5-to-1 and 10-to-1 ratio. So 5-to-1 for heavy dirt such as a chain, and I found that that's fine, and it's also fine on painted surfaces too. Okay, so I'm going to let those parts soak overnight and see how they are in the morning. And for cleaning things on the bike, a couple of products I like to use are this. It kind of foams up like scrubbing bubbles. It's good for cleaning greasy things. And on painted surfaces, this Pedro's bike wash works well. So I've taken my parts out of the parts bath, and for the most part they turned out pretty well. I'm a little disappointed with how the chain came out though, so I'm going to try a stronger solvent on it, specifically this Mean Green Super Strength. This is definitely too strong for painted parts, but I think it will work well with the chain, which of course is not painted. So to reassemble the rear derailleur, they recommend that you put a little bit of grease on the bushings and bolts that go through it. So here are the rear brake parts, and for the most part they came out okay, but there's some rust here, which is kind of unsightly. So I'm going to use a different product on this, as well as some other parts on the bike. So Evaporust is a pretty great product, and it does exactly what it says it will do. So I'm going to create a bath of it with those rusty parts. I'll do the other part of the front brake as well. And you soak it in this for between 1 to 12 hours. It's not a degreaser, so you need to clean the parts first, and they should come out much better. This is actually reusable as well, so when you're finished with it, you can pour it back in the bottle and use it again and again to a certain extent. So these stem bolts here and here are also quite rusty, so I'm going to take those out, put them in the Evaporust too. Actually, I'm going to only take out one of these at a time, because then I can preserve the adjustment of the stem, which again is just about perfect now, so if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I'm going to take out one, keep the other one in to keep the stem in the same position, and then do the other one. So after about 4 hours in the Evaporust, our rusty parts look a lot better. I also put one of the chain rings in here, and that cleared that up nicely too. So here's the contrast between the bolt on the right that's already been in the Evaporust and the one on the left that hasn't. So that's a big improvement. So another thing I'm going to put in the stronger degreaser is the cassette, but first I have to get it off the wheel. So to do that, I'm going to use this Park FR 5.2G removal tool, because it's a Shimano cassette. Insert it, but then when I turn it counterclockwise to loosen it, that's obviously not going to work because it's just turning the ratchet of the free hub. So to make this work, you have to resist the turning of it by using a chain whip. So you used to use these to remove cogs from a freewheel, but now it has another purpose. And you can either use a large wrench to turn this, or if you have a second chain whip, use the wrench flats from that, like this, and it should come right off. So once you remove the lock ring, the cassette will slide right off, and the outer ring is not attached to the rest of it, but it only goes back on one way. All the splines are not the same size. That's not something to worry about. I'm going to put these parts in the heavier degreaser and see what happens. So with some scrubbing help from a toothbrush, this stronger degreaser is doing a great job with the non-painted or anodized parts. I diluted it about 1 part cleaner to 3 parts water, and that seems to work fine. You can see how murky the water is. So the cassette, chain rings, chain, some other parts are in here. And then for the painted and anodized parts, I used a different product, again the Simple Green foaming bike degreaser. Now for the cassette, I have a special patent pending technique for cleaning this that I'll show you when it's finished soaking. So here's how I'm going to clean the cassette. I'm going to take a piece of cardboard. So how thick the cardboard is depends on the spacing of your cassette. This is pretty narrow, so I'm going to use a thin piece. You might want to use a piece of corrugated cardboard for wider spacing. I'm going to wrap a blue shop towel around it. And then while this is still wet, insert it between the cogs and just move it like this. And you can see how much is coming out there. I'm going to do this all around here on every cog. I'm going to put it back in probably, let it soak some more, and do it again. But nothing works better than this for getting into all those nooks and crannies and all the way down to the free hub body. So I gave the free hub and the hub a good cleanup with the simple green bike cleaner. Now it's time to put the cassette back on. So I misspoke. It's actually a SRAM, not a Shimano. It's actually a pretty decent one. It's got hollow rings here. It's very lightweight, but it only goes on one way. It's probably hard to see, but one of these is bigger than the other. So you need to find that one and then slide it onto the correct spot here. This works better with the help of some gravity. So the outer cog likewise has a larger tab right there at the top. It's going to slot on, put the lock ring on, and screw it down. And tighten it up with a wrench. We're all done. So I'm going to reassemble the crank arm now, and this is a good example of why you should take pictures of things before you take them apart. So if I wasn't making this video, I probably wouldn't have taken a picture, and that would have been an oops. So it has this pin that protrudes, and that pin goes behind the crank arm. So I'll put this on like this. Okay, so that's the front. But on the back, you install the other chainring from the other direction. Now, I knew which side was which, but when I took it apart, I didn't realize that there are some actual subtle differences in these bump outs here. And I'm not sure which way they go on. Not sure it matters that much, I'm gonna guess, but I should have taken a picture of this. So I'm gonna assemble this with the hardware. There's a screw that comes in from the front, and then another that comes in from the back to put these together. So I have all the bolts in, and these tighten up with two different Allen keys, one in the back and one in the front of different sizes. So I'm going to go around and tighten these up. So I got those nice and tight. So I'm going to attach the smallest chainring from the back, and this uses the deeper screws to do that. So I'm putting steel screws into an aluminum piece. So I put some grease on the threads to make things go in smoothly and hopefully prevent corrosion. And I don't want to tighten these too tight because, again, steel into aluminum, bad things can happen. So I've done a cleanup of the outside of the bearing, of course the bottom bracket hub. So the crankset's going to simply slide back in the way it came out. Might need a little persuasion. And on the other side, of course, you put the splined crank arm on the correct direction. And then reinsert the bolt. We'll talk about tightening it up later. So while the handlebars are off, I'm going to remove the grips for cleaning. And these actually seem to be fairly cooperative, but I'm going to show you what to do if they're not. So if you can pry it open a little bit like this and stick something like an Allen wrench in, I'm going to take some isopropyl alcohol and drip it in there. Let's work its way around with gravity. So that acts as a lubricant. And these should now slide right off. There we go. So incidentally, when you put it back together, you can use the isopropyl alcohol again as lubricant to slide on, and then it will evaporate and the grips will stay tight. Some people use hairspray for that as well. So one thing I'm not happy with is the condition of the brakes. So when I got the bike, they were kind of jammed on, and I assumed it was a problem with the cables, but the cables are fine. So it looks like there's corrosion on these pivots and the bushings inside brake arms themselves. So I'm going to polish them up with some emery paper and steel wool till it looks like this. So when I get them all done, I can reassemble the brakes. So I'm ready to assemble the brakes. I did determine that the front and rear brakes are identical. So here's one pair. So I'm glad I took pictures when I took it apart, because there's more parts than you might think. Put the spring on, like this. This piece goes in here. And that's one side. I'll do the other side and then put them back on the bike. So this pin has to go into this hole. Now on the rear brakes there's 3 holes, and determined when I took it off that it went into the middle hole. So it has to go onto there, into the hole, and then put the washer and the bolt in. So the new brake pads have a series of dished washers. So as they came and as they go on the rear of the bike, there is a thick one, and there is a thin one that is mates into here. Then you're going to have the brake itself, and then 2 thin ones, an outer washer, and a nut. So the one thing this bicycle did not come with was pedals. So I'm going to use a pair that I already had, some very nice MKS pedals. I think black would look better, but for now this will be fine. And again, I'm kind of old school and using toe clips and straps. So put some grease on the threads, and on the drive side, the pedal inserts just like a regular bolt and screws in clockwise. Now, this is a steel bolt or steel axle going into an aluminum arm, so you need to make sure you don't get it cross-threaded. It goes in smoothly, and you don't want to get it super tight. Certainly snug with a 15mm wrench or a pedal wrench. Now on the non-drive side, it screws in the opposite way. So clockwise is loosened, counterclockwise is tightened. Otherwise, the pedal would loosen as you rode the bike. So normal on the drive side, reverse thread on the left side. Okay, so now it's time to connect everything up, and then the hard part is really adjusting it. So I put the chain back on, which was pretty easy. So to make sure it's threaded correctly through the rear derailleur, again, I lined it up with my scratch here and just reinserting the universal link here, pulling it tight, and the chain is on. So as far as adjustments concerned, so the natural resting place of the rear derailleur is all the way out, right? Even when the cable is not connected. The natural resting place of the front derailleur is all the way in, even when the cable is not connected. So that's a problem, because you need to start your adjustments with the chain all the way on the outside here and all the way on the outside here. So you actually have to connect up the front derailleur cable so you can move the chain with the front derailleur to the outer chainring. So because this derailleur came off of this bicycle and is going back on it, it was already in pretty good adjustment. So you want to make sure that the jockey wheel here is directly beneath the outer sprocket here at its resting point. And if it's not, you want to adjust these adjustment screws right here. So this is the high screw here. This is the low screw. They're labeled. Could be different on different derailleurs. So the high screw is going to set the outermost limit of the derailleur moving this way, and the low screw is going to set the outermost limit moving this way, so it doesn't go into the chain and hit the chain doesn't go into the spokes and hit the door disc here. But again, because this came off, just went back on, this is in pretty good adjustment. The front derailleur is also the same because, again, I didn't take it off. Its height is correct as well as its rotation. So the starting point for adjustment is once the cables are connected, when the chain is all the way to the left here and all the way to the left here, you don't want the chain to be rubbing against the cage here. And again, that can also be set, that should be set first with the limit stop here. So then you've got your high and the low here. So that should be set there. And then cable tension is what's going to affect the adjustment of the rest of them. So all the way to the left and the back and the front, no rubbing on the cage, and the same on the outer. So again, the natural resting position of the rear derailleur is all the way to the smallest cog. So if you connect the cable up taut when it is in that cog, it should be approximately correct. But you can still adjust that cable tension with this barrel adjuster, and that's best done by ear and by feel. So I have it in the middle chainring in the front and one of the middle ones here in the back. So as I pedal, I'll hear and feel if it sounds right. So you shouldn't hear any excessive ticky sound. And I hear a little bit here. So I'm going to try turning this counterclockwise out to increase the cable tension. And that sounds a little bit better. If it goes too far, then you want to go the other direction. But once the cable is tight, again, in the resting position, those fine adjustments are done with this, or you could use the one in the front. And then we have the brakes. And this is one of the most difficult parts of adjustment, I think, because there's just so many variables involved. So I have each brake shoe loosely in the brake arm. Again, with all the dished washers where they're supposed to be. So there's a thick one, a thin one on the inside, and then two more on the outside, and then a smaller washer, fixing washer there. So there's so many variables here. So the brake shoe can go up and down, okay? Because of the dished washers, it also can rotate almost infinitely and be at a different angle as well. So what we have to try to do, and then of course you want both of them to brake evenly from both sides. So first, make sure that the wheel is on securely. So I recommend putting the bike on the ground so the wheel's all the way up in the dropouts before you start to adjust anything. So you may want to connect the cable up too, because that'll hold the brakes together as they're being adjusted. Okay. So I'm going to experiment with different settings here, and I can now squeeze them together. And I want the sort of angle as they approach here to be the same, and roughly they should be in the same spot on either side on the brake here. So you want the brake shoe to hit the rim so it's not too high, doesn't hit the tire, so it's not too low, so it goes below the edge of the rim, the brake pad will wear unevenly. So if you apply inward pressure to the brake as you locate the brake pad, you can get the height of it right, and if it's pressed against it, it's going to be flat. So you either want it to be flat against the rim, or in some cases you want it to be towed in, meaning that the front hits a little bit before the back. And then right here we can see where it is in side of the brake here, so it's near the bottom. So I'm going to tighten this up a little bit and then try the other side and see if this is a good starting point. So this is the starting point of my adjustment. If I squeeze them together, you'll see that, well, they don't really look exactly the same. They're kind of at different angles. So this is going to need more trial and error to get both sides looking the same. So I've got both sides pretty even. The bolt is coming through about the same spot on each of the brakes here in the middle. When you push it against the rim, it hits the rim squarely without touching the tire or extending below the rim. So it's about the same on both sides. So of course it doesn't matter what the adjustment is here on the bench. It matters whether it works well on the road. So now we're going to adjust the cable tension. So before you do that, make sure that the cable is firmly in the brake lever here. If this is out, you'll do a lot of work for nothing. So I'm going to get this brake noodle where it's supposed to be. In here, so make sure it goes all the way through. So I've got the brakes squeezed against the rim, got the cable pretty taut. I'm going to loosen it just a little bit from there and then tighten it and have this be our starting point of our adjustment. Okay, so that's clearly too tight, but what you can do is if you left this barrel adjuster a little bit loose, you can then turn it in like this and then give yourself a little bit of extra room there. So now it's still too tight, so I'm going to have to loosen the cable a little bit more. Actually, I'm going to back this barrel adjuster out some more first to give myself something to work with if I need to loosen it some more. I'm going to tighten the cable, so again, trial and error. So this feels okay to start with. To make sure things are tight so it doesn't slip. Now if I was replacing the cables, a new cable will stretch a lot in early use, so you're almost certainly going to have to readjust this, but because I'm reusing the old cable, that's not going to be so much of a problem. So if the adjustment is close, I'm going to take it out on the road and see how it performs after doing the same to the rear brake. So the drivetrain's in pretty good adjustment now, but before the first road test, I want to lubricate things a little bit since everything is squeaky clean. There's so many products on the market that you can use to lubricate your chain. I've tried many of them. I've tried boiling my chain in paraffin wax. I've tried things that are clear, things that are black, all kinds of things. And many of them are terrible. So what I generally use is just basic silicone spray, particularly when things are clean like this. It's a light lubricant. It's going to penetrate into the plates of the chain and not attract too much dirt. Now, if the drivetrain's already dirty, sometimes I'll use WD-40. So WD-40 is not the best lubricant in the world, but it will act as a solvent and get some of that dirt off your drivetrain. So I generally do this outside, so to avoid making a mess. So I'm going to take it outside and spray some silicone lubricant on the chain as I rotate it backwards on the cassette. And of course you can also lubricate the movement points on the derailleur. I've already greased the bushings here, so I'm not going to do that. And certainly the pivot points here on the front derailleur as well. So before we go out on the road, we need to check the torque of the fasteners that we loosened. So particularly on the stem here, you've got a clamp here, you've got a clamp here, right? So if either of these are not tightened correctly, that could mean very bad things. You need to make sure it's adjusted to the right torque. So it's actually listed, because it's so important, right here on the stem. So between 5 and 7 Newton meters for these stem bolts. So here on the handlebar clamp, it's also 5 to 7 Newton meters, so that's helpful. So here I have a specialty bicycle torque wrench, which I've adjusted to 6 Newton meters, which I think is between 5 and 7. So this is a 4mm hex key. So I'm going to tighten these in a crosswise pattern. So then this one, and then I'll do this one. And then make sure these stem bolts are tight as well. So there's one on each side. So one of the most important parts to torque correctly is this crank arm bolt. So this is between 10.8 and 14.7 Newton meters. So that small specialty torque wrench I have is not going to be big enough, doesn't have a big enough range to do that. So I have this other one here, which I've set to about 12 Newton meters, which is of course right in the middle of that range. So I'm going to tighten this up, and this can be surprisingly tighter than you think it should be. I think we've got it good there though. So there you have it. This bicycle now goes, shifts, and stops very well. And it looks a lot better too. I used some flat black touch-up paint, acrylic model paint on the top tube. That looks a lot better. So for an investment of $75 for the bicycle, plus about $25 just for the brake pads, I had to add a tube to the front wheel and pedals, which I already had. I think they'd look better in black, but these are very good road bike pedals, and this is basically a road bike. Now there's certainly more I could have done. I did not replace the cables or casing, and the casing was a little rustier than I thought it was, so that can certainly use doing. The front hub is not in as good shape as I thought it was, so I might do that, probably in a different video. But otherwise, I think this turned out really well, and I'm quite happy with it and look forward to many miles of fun.